Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. The current session focuses on linguistic relativism and conservatism. I hope and expect by the end of this session you would be able to understand both of these terms and their interrelationship. Well, at the outset of the session, I would like to define linguistic relativism. Linguistic relativism is a term that is defining, relativity of language in relation to, human culture or human society. And it states the culture of a language affects its speaker's worldview or their cognition. If a person speaks language A, his worldview would be different. If he speaks language B, his perception of the world would be different. When we talk of the idea of grammar conservatism, grammar conservatism is actually adherence to, acceptance of, and following the rules of grammar very, very strictly. It also means using language correctly. Well, with reference to these two ideas, there were certain claims that were made by Chomsky and, his supporters, whom we may call Chomskyians. The first claim that they made was of the human languages hide a common universal structure of thought or universal grammar. Chomsky believed that all human languages share one universal structure. And not only one universal structure, this also implied one universal thought at the back of it. According to Pinker, to speak a natural language is a question of translating universal mentalities into whatever particular language one is brought up speaking. So, in the Chomskyan tradition, Pinker's view was that, that universal grammar exists there. So whether you speak language A or B or C or D, or for that matter, any of the languages, actually speaking any of these languages simply and only means translating that universal grammar and the rules of that universal grammar into the particular code of this particular language. Otherwise, nothing changes. On the other hand, Pinker thinks grammar conservatism, it urges to differentiate between correct and incorrect usage of a language. This would simply be a snobbery, and this has nothing to do with this process otherwise of using language for human interaction or to use it correctly. Now, obviously, if the languages we learn to speak are all just outward manifestations, according to this idea of Chomsky and his friends, it is only the manifestation. Any new language that you learn or any language that a particular speaker or groups of speakers speak, that just kind of translates or manifests that kind of universal structure of language, then actually there shouldn't be any difference whether we say aren't or ain't. Because these are again two different types of, though we are using two different choices, formal and informal, but these are the manifestations in two different ways. The original idea remains the same according to the universal grammar. Now, if in that context we look at that, then what about all the deviations in grammar and all the, conservative perspectives of using grammar correctly, using the syntax correctly? This particular structure is right, this particular structure is not right. So, in this sense, it would challenge, the idea of what Chomsky has said. Both the ideas do not match. Whereas when we look at the idea of linguistic relativism in a milder form, we can say that at least to some degree, our linguistic choices, they do affect the way how we look at things. For example, the linguistic choices in a particular language would determine how people see different colors. I would simply give the example, if in some example there is no word for turquoise, for example, the people then would be inclined to see this turquoise color that is a mixture of blue and green. They would either see it as green or they would see it as blue. However, if Pinker feels free to embrace all the usage as equal, if to him it does not make any difference whether option A is taken or option B, whether language A is taken or language B, or whether even within the same language, option A, for example, of using aren't is taken, or option B of using are not is taken, if to him all this is precisely because there is a universal grammar that works behind that, then the issue of how our language affects our version of the world or our perspective of the world, this really becomes debatable. So, if there is no common linguistic bond, the urge to cling to local rules and structures begins to make more sense. If we leave this Chomskyan idea of universal grammar behind, only and only then it would start making sense that people would use language rules that are more local based, that are more based on their own cultures. So in a nutshell, what I would say is, yes, different linguistic communities have different standards, and there is no neutral arbiter to distinguish one, language as superior or one language as inferior. And yes, though language choices have some influence on the way how we look at the world, but on the other hand, it is, examined by the sociolinguists that, strictly speaking, they do not determine how we look at the world.